Here with another discussion about Boris Ursus, who I would like to call the exile, really, of Kislev. Not exiled in the sense that Boris was never the Tsar of Kislev, but in the sense that Boris kind of decided that the best way to stop the end times was to throw himself into the middle of the fray against Archaon, who's right next door. Now, very interestingly and very clearly, Boris is quite capable of beating Archaon quite quickly. Like, between the Tsar Guard, the Patriarch, the Warbear Riders, the Armor Cossars, and himself, he has an army that's capable of doing so. And when we consider Archaon, which represents the end times, and we'll see how Creative Assembly handles that specific expansion path, the way Archaon becomes a problem is if you let him become a problem. See, Archaon is very strong if he levels up, if he gets his items, if he gets the Regiments Renown. Now, the issue for Boris is that, yes, he can and will defeat Archaon, but the issue a lot of people do struggle with is that they feel that Boris' starting position is just not great. But that's the problem that people assume. They assume, well, if we abandon the starting position, this is not going to end up, this is just cheating in a campaign. But if we stay here, it's a bad campaign. It's kind of a mix of both, really, that Boris Ursus needs. I would say from a pure gameplay perspective, two things need to happen with Boris. First off, he needs to start with Prague. Yes, actual Prague, as a city, as a development center that he uses in order to get all of the landmarks here. Because the way things currently stand, if you change Boris' starting position from the Tower of Torment or from near Archaon, then Archaon becomes too powerful. But on the flip side, you always need to also go back to Kislev. The cities themselves are pretty important. Now, you have a lot of tools in order to get the Confederation with Prague, but it would probably just be better to start with the city. I mean, it's not like Frot or Azazel are going to attack Prague. It has a powerful garrison, it has a powerful army available in there. And the issue for Katarin as a Legendary Lord is she's wasting time fighting Norskans when really she should be starting in Igorov and making her way towards Zavastra. That would be a better campaign path. Because you look at Katarin, her natural campaign expansion path, the one that developers want you to go for, is Forchikoga, Igorov, etc. That is, however, not an ideal situation. So that kind of needs to be reversed. Basically, Katarin needs to have a natural expansion path in her campaign that leads towards Boris, and Boris needs to have a natural expansion path that leads to Katarin, because, you know, he's her dad, and that is an important factor in things. And by the way, Boris has a lot of different tools to make his starting position work, so that's not the problem. Katarin could use better climate, but he already has climate. He has Wasteland, he has Chaos. Wasteland as unpleasant as opposed to uninhabitable. He gets extra devotion from Chaos Wasteland. So a lot of the negatives that you might think in Chaos Wasteland, as well as the constant gain of supporters in the Chaos Wastelands, that you get by fighting Chaos, is a huge benefit to Boris. So Boris is perfectly where he needs to be, but he also needs Kislev behind him, some kind of level of guaranteed confederation, to ensure you're not wasting your time as a player trying to, you know, do two things at once. Because when you do two things at once, when you're, you know, recruiting a lord, sending them to Frozen Landing, recolonizing it, etc., that's a problem. And it's interesting I keep mentioning Prague, because Prague would give Boris exactly what he needs. When you look at Prague, you look at the square of the Citadel. This reduces global recruitment duration by -1 turn. So Boris could use the Prague Citadel with all of the units that can be recruited from it. He has a lot of money because of all the battles he fights. He could get, you know, Armor Cossars, Trelsi, then Tsar Guard, etc. recruited very fast. Maybe Prague should start as a tier 3 settlement that Boris gets, or maybe it should start with a growth building as opposed to a barracks as things are, or give people the choice to define how it is. Not a dual start decision. Dual starts like Alfarian and others don't quite work, but more of like, you start with the settlement, you can develop the settlement to benefit you, if you want, and you have to choose that balancing act. Do you spend money in Kislev and Prague and the territory here, Or do you focus too much on Archaon? Because if you focus too much on Archaon, then it means your endgame campaign situation is not great with Boris. He's very strong. Like, this is a guy who walks with a bunch of armor Sars and Akshinas and just takes fucking Zarnagrund, and it's suitable climate. Lots of different discussions on that point. Now, let me talk a bit about the climate situation. So, and his faction effects. He gets a diplomatic benefit with Ice Court, but as with the dwarves, and even more recently with High Elves, I think some system of guaranteed confederation with major factions is ideal. But again, starting with Prague. There's mods that do change his starting position, but yeah, Boris should really start with Prague, I think, while also having the ability, if you choose to do so, to fight Archaon. Because you could abandon the starting position and fight Archaon later, but that's not ideal. He also gets a construction time -1 turn for capital and settlement buildings and recruit rank for Warbear Riders, as well as construction cost for garrison and religious buildings, campaign movement range, all that kind of stuff. He gets a unique commandment in Chaos Wasteland Climate that reduces corruption and it vastly improves devotion, which means he can use the invocations of the various gods of Kislev better. He can also, with all of that devotion, use the army invocations as well. And on top of that, because he's gaining so many supporters, he can get all of these kind of benefits right here, which also give you, you know, population surplus or reduction of construction. I think it's Dominion, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm looking at Spiritual Conquest. Spiritual Conquest is one of the best things Grave Assembly did in the Kislev rework. They just forgot to rework the Legendary Lords. But Spiritual Conquest gives you population surplus when annually captured settlements, and when you're fighting Chaos, which is what Kislev's entire point in the lore is about, and if Kislev ever does anything other than that, they're not Kislev, you get 100 devotion for newly captured settlements in Chaotic Wasteland. On top of that, when we consider Atamans, and that's the reason, by the way, Boris should get Prague, is because you get Atamans for every 2 provinces you control, so he naturally get 1. Maybe that system could be changed, I'm unsure. But the less devotion you have in a territory, the more experience Atamans gain. And Atamans can nullify climate penalties, because when you're playing Boris, you don't really want to care about Daniel whatsoever. What you want to do is take the Howling Citadel, fortify it, you get benefits for it, and then maybe put an Ataman in there and maybe a very small army. Your goal is to defeat Archaon and Arbol and then go back to Kislev to help them out against Frat and Azazel. A couple of other things. The immunity to cast corruption for his own army is something that maybe he should be able to get as a faction effect. There might be some research or supporters, but I just don't recall right now. You know, I don't remember every single detail. That's the simple fact of it. There's other things with Kislev, like the Patriarchs themselves. They should be able to have all of these effects at once, with the choice really being at the top here between Healer and the Stigmashable Leader and all that. But all of these Bal Hymns or Daj's Song of Winter, Sunlight, etc. should all be unlocked for all Patriarchs. Radius Total War does this brilliantly well, by the way, and that's one of the reasons I really enjoy that specific mod. People talk about bloat of units, fair enough, but the actual core mechanics of how they handle certain things, not all of them, is very strong. As for Boris himself, he could use some more interesting things, because regeneration for elemental bear units is just not exactly great. Glorious Charge, however, is a freaking amazing system to give to someone like Boris Ursus. And this is also the reason why we need a better way of gaining supporters for Katarin, Astankia, and Kastalten. Because right now, I mean, Astankia, you can gain supporters by fighting Chaos, but you kind of waste your time fighting Skaven. So the gain of supporters should be also against Skaven, maybe even Greenskins, maybe at a lower rate than fighting Warriors of Chaos. So it should be dependent on the kind of foe you're fighting. Gain more supporters if you're fighting pure Warriors of Chaos, or, you know, Demon Prince, maybe the most against the Demon Prince, because really Yuri over here is just the worst kind of Legendary Lord, and maybe he should genuinely be removed from the game, because he's adding absolutely nothing. Unless Creative Assembly wants to rework him, but honestly, at this point, I don't think he's adding anything valuable. He's limiting Epidemius, he's limiting Malice Darkblade. He's not creating a good campaign environment over here in this entire area, and that is indeed a problem. Obviously, that's a problem that Boris Ursus takes significant benefit from, because with Epidemius, Daniel, and Malus Darkblade all contained, he can just demolish every single one of them and defeat them in detail, which is one of your significant benefits. There's other things to talk about, you know, obviously research tree, it's always a bit of a mess, a bit bloated, a bit pointless. I've never quite liked the research tree in Warhammer 3, could always be better. Anyway, that's roughly all I had to say on this specific subject. I know a lot of people who play Kislev don't like Boris Ursus because they think, oh, it's the climate, annoyance, and all that. But if you understand the kind of ways the game is played, the systems of the game, diplomacy, etc., you would realize that Boris is the best Legendary Lord of Kislev by a country mile. He's better than Astanka, even though she gets a lot of army debuffs, because those army debuffs of hers are just a messy and pointless system. Boris just has pure power and good positioning, and believe it or not, that's better than any unique campaign mechanic. If I were to say he deserves any unique campaign mechanic, I'm not sure exactly what it could be. Maybe more Atamans, maybe political choices he could make using, I don't know, a unique resource. Like, that would probably be best. Like, you can, say, for instance, have a mechanic similar to Karl Franz that he has, so you can push Kastaltin, Katarin, and Astanka on a better path. Maybe a system similar to Legendary Grudges as well. But that's roughly it. If you do enjoy my content, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon, always available. And take care, boys and girls. I'll see you on the next one.